Today I'm talking to Tim Pickup and Nicola Sharman, who are Genetic Moo, interactive art group. People use a lot of different terms, for what we're all interested in: computer art, digital art, new media art, net art, and all that sort of thing. Do you have any particularly strong feelings either way about any of those?
So not really. Basically, when we started out, we did describe ourselves as interactive artists, and then that needed quite a lot of explaining. So what we tend to do now is call ourselves digital artists, and then usually follow it up by saying a bit more about what we do, and then say something about interaction. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, we've used all those terms, and it varies each time for each different project. But I think broadly, I reckon we're going to be more interactive artists in the future, which we started out as. So it's kind of come back full circle. I can see there could be more use for that.
Yeah.
Could you just summarise your own contribution to digital art? I mean, what sort of media have you worked in? What sort of type? What sort of style?
Yeah. So I've broken it down a bit. So we make interactive digital art, digital installations. So the interactive is usually full body, multi-user, unencumbered, and the technology that we use, that the interface that people interact with is usually quite simple. So it's either they don't use, it's just they walk into the space and they interact with it, or they may use simple tools like torches, or it could be a mouse, something like that. And then the digital part of it is the combinations of digital video, photography, animation, and code. And then the installation aspect, we think of, we like to create immersive installations. They're modular, so we fit pieces together. And our aim is to create what we call a digital ecosystem.
Why the interest in digital art? I mean, why digital? Why not ordinary art? Where did that come from?
I've always been interested in digital art, and we've both always been kind of technicians, so on the sort of edge of traditional art forms, but more on the kind of technological, or in my case, computer side, in Nicola's case, more film editing side. Computers are brilliant. To me, that's the greatest new technology there is. That's what artists should be using to create art. So to me it seems obvious that you should be using computers to create art, and I'm in particular coding on my side, graphics and other editing and other things on Nicola's side. So
yeah, I studied 16mm filmmaking at college in the 90s, and I had a particular interest in expanded film, so film off the screen. I wanted to I wanted an active audience. So I was trying to do then what we now can easily do, but it was so much more challenging. So I was creating 16mm film loops for people to move around. So I studied at North East London Poly, which was where people who were part of the London Filmmakers Co-op taught. And so they had a particular interest in the material and form. And so we were encouraged to experiment, but all of these things were so challenging. And then non-linear editing came in, and it was just like all the things I was trying to do with an optical printer could suddenly be done very cheaply with digital. And so as much as I love celluloid, it suddenly made all of these things that I was trying to do easily possible, and that's why I headed into it.
I mean, it strikes me that you're constantly breaking new ground technically, and what you're doing, and trying different ideas and different technical systems. Do you find it difficult to establish that as an artistic practice, to get people to accept that it's art?
Oh, that's interesting, because actually when I was doing 16mm, it was at a time that even the teachers at the college who were teaching painting and sculpture didn't recognise film as art. So it's funny that now that 16mm sits comfortably in a gallery, it's the interactive art that's the challenge. So I just feel I've continually gone into something that's actually presented challenges. And I don't think, maybe it sounds glib to say we don't care, but it's a lot of the places that we show in aren't conventional art spaces, and I feel really confident that the art spaces will come on board and be more interested, but I believe that there has been an anxiety over the technology, how difficult it is to set up, or if it's playful, can it be art? There's this whole business about critical distance, and if it's interactive and you're in it, do you have the possibility of standing back and thinking about it? But What do you say to that? Because that's making it sound perhaps more political than...
I sort of see there are two parallel art worlds. There's a traditional art world and there's a digital art world, and so occasionally they overlap. And we mainly work in the digital art world, but sometimes we go into the traditional art world as well. We want to put things in traditional art spaces. We grew up going to traditional art galleries and being amazed by the Rothko room or whatever it was, or something like that. So yeah, absolutely want to get as much of this sort of stuff as possible into traditional galleries. Eventually there's bits more and more, year by year, more and more pieces appear in it, because the public want to see this sort of art, which is using current technologies.
What's interesting is we belong to the London Group, and the London Group is over 100 years old. It was started by
Epstein and Bomberg and
Gaudio
Brescia and stuff.
And the group perhaps doesn't have the vitality that it once had, or the significance that it once had. Nevertheless, it's made up of artists that are traditional artists, and quite a lot of them are genuinely interested in what we're doing, and we are getting more digital artists are coming into the group. But I think that's given us a more immediate dialogue with people to actually work out what is art and what isn't. There are members in the group that are challenged by the notion of, can sound be art? So to actually, have let's say more personal dialogues with people perhaps helps us better think about how we engage with people, explain what we're doing,
It is one of the fascinating things about digital art, isn't it? The way it both is part of the art world and isn't. And as an individual you can do far more in one way than you could in the traditional art world, but in other ways it's far more difficult to be accepted, I think.
That's right. Well, because they would perhaps some of especially the big art galleries, think that by giving people a device to listen to someone talking about the artwork, they're breaking ground in the sort of digital world, but so they're seeing it still maybe as too much of a tool, a way of presenting films from their archives or something, but not perhaps really challenging themselves with what they could do with it.
Yes. One question I've been longing to ask you, it isn't down on my list, but why Genetic Moo?
Genetic Moo started out as a film performance group, and there were about 10 people at one point, and it was formed by Nicola putting a flyer into Exploding Cinema, which was a film collective that still meets in London once a month and shows anything that gets sent in. So we formed around the idea of using film. We some of us had video cameras, which was when they were still quite expensive. So this is about 15, 20 years ago maybe. I had a computer, so we could edit on that. So we were sharing resources really and trying to figure out. So only that set of people came together, and we chucked a load of random words into the hat to find the name for that group. One of which was my and Simon's tutor, who were two of the original members. Our tutor called us genetic cul-de-sacs because we were never going to have children, and which we didn't. So that was part of it. And then someone else put in a Dada phrase, moo cow moo, that he was interested in at the time. And then these kind of words got jumbled together, and that was. So it became that, and it was a filmmaking group initially. But then bit by bit, people left, or we spread out. People got more skilled, did courses, and then we were left. And we carried on with the name because it actually kind of fitted what we do. Because our stuff is takes some kind of biology as a source of inspiration, but mutates it through code often. So it's kind of sort of fitted in a way, and it's quite a memorable name. No one else have a domain.
Well, yes.
We're stuck with it, basically.
For that, yes. You say on your website that your work is informed by science. Can you expand a little bit on what exactly that means?
Yes. So historically, my favourite subject at school was biology, and I was particularly interested in simple creatures, amoeba, one of my favourite. And it turns out that actually Tim was also very interested in science, and perhaps these things came to light after we'd been working within the group Genetic Moo for some time. And so one of the earliest creatures and that we do call our artwork creatures actually, that one of the very first pieces that we worked on was a starfish. And it was I'd read a New Scientist article, and I was excited by this information that the starfish had evolved and given up its brain in the process to simply a complex system of nerves. And it was just this idea of actually evolving away from having a brain, and it just made me think how interesting to think about how humans, whenever people talk about the future human, think in terms of the cerebral human, and I was thinking about the more sensual human, so thinking about what might evolution look like if we look back at our earlier ancestors, which starfish is one of them. So it threw up ideas around, how a life and simple creatures in science are often tied together. And so we started working on building artworks that were actually informed by some of these simple creatures, starfish, urchins, sea squirts. And so often when we are developing an artwork, we're actually reading about creatures, systems, some sort of simple ecosystems, ponds, how they work, or we did work with based around Leeuwenhoek, who created or developed the first microscope, and his animalcules, this discovery of life forms in the mouth. But also you were particularly interested anyway because of a life and how it looks at nature as well. Yes, Tim?
Yeah, artificial life. That is a science, a computer science. I suppose the reason to go back to an early one about why computer art is that through algorithms you can get artworks that change over time and not fixed, not the same every time. They're different every time, and that naturally leads to the idea of the artwork is alive in my head. So that's why I've always been interested in artificial life, which is a sort of a much smaller concern than artificial intelligence, but there's been a set of kind of mainly computer scientists and some artists looking at this since about the 70s, 80s. And that's kind of the key thing with our pieces. So they're kind of there's something alive going on, and that's what we're really interested in, pulling out these sort of what makes something feel alive and what happens when you're in the presence of something that's alive, but definitely obviously not alive. It's just a projection. It's just pixels in a computer program. So, yeah.
And it's this open-endedness then, because as I mentioned earlier, I studied filmmaking, and so often with filmmaking it's very much about the fixed narrative, the beginning, the middle and the end, and which always frustrated me. Maybe I just wasn't very good at telling stories, but that's partly why I was experimenting, creating filmic installations, so that your position changes the way you interpret it. And so that's why actually then getting into generative art making, where you have rules, you understand there is a narrative, but it's open-ended and it can change and it can do things, more importantly, that we can be surprised by, is actually quite key to what we do.
Was Starfish shown at one of the early Connecticut exhibitions?
Was it?
Yes, it was, yeah, about 2012, something like that.
Yeah, I remember seeing it.
Yeah, it was amongst other things. It was in a small room with lots of projections around, yeah.
In Connecticut?
Yeah. Micro Connecticut.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, the one in Brick Lane Way?
Could have been.
Yes, it was, is the answer.
Okay,
Yeah.
No, fine, it was part of...
There have been quite a few starfish, digital starfish though, over the years. Paul Brown's son did one as well. Mimetic starfish, I think his was called.
Yeah.
No, it's because they lend themselves, sea creatures lend themselves to being coded into a screen which has got no physical depth. I mean, now 3D stuff's come in, but before that, these sort of creatures work well on a...
And in fact, it's quite interesting because
virtual
it's
space.
partly, I suppose it's the main reason why Tim and I started working together, because, as Tim mentioned, there were quite a few people in Genetic Moo. And in 2004, I went on to my MA at the John Lansdowne Centre as part of Middlesex. Tim you studied there about 10 years earlier, which is, an important... It was a significant place for computer art. And it was interesting because I was actually working with starfish, and I remember you saying to me that actually, I was learning for the first time that A-Life had actually been looking at creatures that were living in water, because then there wasn't the issues of gravity. It was much, they maybe had simpler ways of reproduction or different ways that could be explored through A-Life quite easily.
We haven't done a digital cow yet. I'm pretty useless at 3D coding, and and other people are so good at it that I don't feel a need to. You're often using a lot of other people's stuff to render your thing, and we're happier, as you can sort of see, with very simple stuff where you can literally control everything and still create interesting effects, but with very, very simple stuff. So I've sort of kept away a bit from 3D, but we've just bought a 3D printer, and I'm sure we'll be having more of a look at that and combining that into our 2D worlds, because we like clashes of aesthetics as well. So, yeah.
Who are the artists you admire? Who influences you in a practical sense?
Well, so this gave me cause for deep thinking, because I can name lots of artists, but actually the thing is there's so many artists that have been of interest to me, but I think perhaps more importantly, more typically, we're interested in the techniques or methods. It may be that we're drawn to work that is immersive, for example. I mean, Pippi Lottie-Riss did a wonderful show in the Hayward, and I'd seen her work before, but it was the first time to see her very analogue work, but video projections and models presented in these huge spaces and so immersive. And I think that was the first time you'd seen Pippi Lottie-Riss' work, wasn't it?
On a large scale, yeah, that was a good show. That was about immersion, though. It wasn't really digital.
It was, but it was exciting. She'd started working with analogue video and has obviously moved into digital as well. And I think that it's so. I don't limit myself in saying, it has to be this before I'm interested in it. And my work can be informed by printmaking or painting. But I think perhaps the most significant person is someone who would have said he wasn't an artist at all, and that's Myron Kruger, who you introduced me to when we first started creating interactive works together, in particular because of his work Video Space, and this
Place, I think it was Video Place, wasn't it?
Oh, we can check.
The book's just here.
Yeah.
I know, whatever.
But it's this idea of critter, so the fact that he had a little creature that would that people could react or respond. We've
never seen his work in the flesh. I don't think it exists anymore. I mean, he did it in the 70s, 80s, I suppose, but in America. And it was never part of an arts world. I think he did it within an academic institution. But anyway, however, that book and the idea of being put into interacting with virtual creatures or artificial reality, as he called it, is now called virtual reality. Or it was an open space, so you'd stand in a space and see something on a screen and engage with it somehow. That's been hugely important in what we do. So that was his definite inspiration.
And it crossed over because when I was doing my installations at college with filmmaking, and Tim was doing his experiments at college using code and video, I would say that there was this connecting point through Myron Kruger's work that we both understood, and it sort of gave us a common language about what we were trying to do. So,
but I've got a huge range going all the way back of computer and digital artists who I've been inspired by. But in some cases, as you say, it's not particular artists. It might be like fractal art or something like that. I wouldn't say there's a particular person within. There are lots of artists who've used fractals to create incredible things over the year. But a few in particular is Harold Cohen, who did the Aaron piece. So he coded his own art creating computer. I saw when I was about 12, I think, at the Tate Britain. Is it now? One of the Tates.
That was one of the very first.
Yeah. So I was actually in there, and he was there, and his little robot was going around drawing these things on the wall. So that was definitely inspired me early on. And then other pieces later on, like William Latham's been quite important, and Carl Sims. There's some of the early people who are doing artificial life art, I would call it. So creating creatures and evolving things.
It's very interesting. I mean, the next question I have down is whose opinions about digital art do you value? And when I wrote that question, I was expecting people to talk about critics and what have you, but nobody talks about critics. Everybody seems to make their own minds up.
Yeah.
The only one I can think of was there's one called Philip Gallanter who writes about generative art. Yes. He's quite good, but he's not hugely active now. He was a few years back, and there was the Australian. The digital art manifesto, those guys were quite interesting, but then they just
that was amazing,
it's very fluid, isn't it? These people kind of come and go. But I mean, in terms of theory books, we do read the theory books, but I wouldn't say any in particular is sort of.
But you see, the thing is, I think if you are the artist, while all of these things, these ideas are interesting because they maybe help you articulate a point that you've been trying to think about. How do I explain this? And suddenly you find someone actually explains it quite nicely or even quite brutally. It's like, for me, it's actually, you're doing it, you're making it, and you're inspired by, in our case, by science, possibly by other artists. I mean, when I go to exhibitions, of course I'm interested to see how people are making their work, especially if it's immersive or interactive. What are they doing? And how they describe it is probably, more interesting to me than how someone is categorizing it, because sometimes I think it's still too limited, and I think it's fantastic that people are attempting to explain what interactive art is and create a new taxonomy or, you know, like new language for it. But at the same time, actually, it's simply to make people who aren't quite sure about it more comfortable about talking about it. And do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in this sort of world, who are the, if you like, the gatekeepers in the digital world? Who do you have to persuade before you get your work shown? You know?
So I think all this little phase of questions is all based on the sort of the model, the traditional art world model, of a series of kind of art critics battling out their particular area, and then galleries representing that. And I'm not sure that's particularly holds true within digital, although obviously there are places which show digital art and there are curators attached to those places. Some of quite a few of you we've worked with, and they're kind of...
But in a way you can interestingly see that in Margate. We have the Turner Contemporary and we have Dreamland. Tim and I do loads of work with Dreamland. They are about connecting with families, people doing things, they're interested in technology.
Educational.
The Turner, we've done 1 or 2 things at the Turner, and workshops, they can make sense of workshops and the community. But in terms of digital exhibitions, they're still very, very much, you know, we're waiting for them to do something. So
that is a bit more unpacking. They're the reason Margate has kind of risen in the last 5-10 years. It's the success of the Turner Contemporary, which is this new gallery on the end of on the edge of the pier, which has had millions of visitors already in just the 3 or 4 years it's been open or whatever.
Huge success.
Way more than they thought they would get, and it's really lifted the whole town up and made it much more creative and exciting. Lots of people moving here. At the same time, they haven't got a clue what to do with. They don't engage hardly at all with local artists. They're very controlling. They're a monosyllabic, sort of monolithic kind of organisation. So actually, we shouldn't be kind of slagging them off. We're trying to do some projects with them eventually, but they're quite hard to get to, and a bit slow. They don't really understand digital at all.
As you hear, Dreamland have struggled, but Dreamland have we have done very well with them.
No, they've got a budget now. They will struggle financially, but they're fine.
Wants to have some of that audience. So
I'm not sure. Yes, that's a Margate gatekeeper. I don't know if that's the right sort of.
But Turner is huge. It is, people are interested in how they're working.
They're the gatekeeper to the Turner. It's their building. But I mean, it's not nothing to do with digital art. But why not? It's a big space. They've had a few projected things in there that look brilliant. One of the things I've always thought is nonsensical about the traditional art world is that you're not, generally speaking, you're not allowed to touch anything. You're not allowed to take any photograph of anything because it's owned by the established art world or the artist or whatever it is. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, who is the audience for digital art? It should be anyone who's allowed to could take a photo of something, and that is everybody, because everybody has a mobile phone on them and wants to engage and take a selfie in this space and engage with what they're doing.
Yes.
We don't code anything on mobiles yet, but we're going to try and move in that direction so they can even change what's on the wall with their mobiles. So the audience is everyone who's got a mobile phone, which is everybody basically.
And in terms of our experience, so I would say in the vast majority of cases, we are given commissions because the institution or the organisation that is wanting us to do something with them actually wants to connect with the young audience and the family audience. And so, for example, we did a commission for Neon last year, and they have regular gallery spaces to show work in, and they have other places such as shopping centres, and that's where we went. We were more than happy to be there because we've worked in shopping centres before. So it's for people who know we're on, but it's also people wandering by. One of my favourites is a little old lady saying, "I don't know what it is, but it looks wonderful." And
we always get the shopping centre part of the festival. Or we often get it, which is fine, but at some point we want to move to the big, nice, pristine space. Yeah, but we get numbers because it's anyone who walks past and we'll grab them in. We don't have any shame about it. It's something for people to have a look at, and I don't care if they don't like it or not or whatever. Just come and have a look.
You're bringing new people in, new audiences in a sense, aren't you? By producing the sort of thing that they're perhaps more used to from television or something like that, rather than art galleries.
And in spaces they're more used to, which is the shopping centre or the high street or whatever. We often get these sort of spaces.
And it's not unusual. I mean, we've been involved in a number of projects where people, if they've taken data, have said this is the first artistic experience that the visitor has had. This is the first time they've been into an art space. And it doesn't surprise me because it's the interaction in our work is simple. we do coding workshops as part of it, which we'll talk about later, but there's lots of ways into our work, and we're usually with it. So we're usually there actually talking about what we're doing or encouraging people to participate, and that's actually quite important to us as well. So yes, it's open to anyone. We would encourage anyone to come into it, and it is true, we would like to get into, show our work in a more conventional gallery space
as well,
because because it's always interesting. Then our work, one of the key things to our work, it's not just about interaction, it is actually about rich content as well, and it's very, very nice to be able to talk about the more complex ideas behind our work rather than just have the playful side understood.
Did you find that things like, say, winning the Lumen Prize helped get you more exposure in conventional galleries?
Not the winning the prize itself, because Lumen was quite small at that point, and possibly still is quite small in some ways. I mean, it looks, it's a large outward-facing organisation, but it's actually run by very few people. But no, it's more the getting to know them and various opportunities which have come up as a result of getting to know Carla and Jack as it is now. So yeah, we've had some amazing opportunities from the Lumen Prize. So they were really good to get to know.
Yeah, so it wasn't in the initial sense, because it was true that so we were just starting out with our Micro World project. And Carla was in her second year of the Lumen Prize, and I think we realised that we had a lot of crossover, and we were fortunate enough to get to know each other through our
we enjoy working with each other as well. I think so.
And so I have the Welsh connection, and Carla's in Wales, so we got to know each other, and then we introduced Carla to Cass via Nick Lambert, and I would say that there's been a lot of growing together, and we've been supportive. I mean, what's fantastic for the Lumen, and therefore fantastic to us, for us, is the fact that they have grown exponentially in terms of the submissions, the quality. We were amazed, like in 2 years, that they were getting some really credible contributions, and of course then that's been great for us. And certainly this year we're doing 2 Lumen Prize Presents exhibitions as well, and
there are ideas for others in the pipeline as well. So it's been really productive.
It's been amazing.
Yeah.
So, but it has been a growing together, and I think one of the things that was really important was that Carla had wanted to champion digital art, and was also so uncertain and honestly uncertain about how to describe it. She knew she was passionate about it and learning and wanting to connect, and I think with that openness and interest in what we were doing and other artists like us, led the way to rather than it being ego-led, it was actually digitally art-led.
Yes. Has there in fact been a change in the way that the artist is viewed? I mean, from being a solitary hero to being something slightly different in the digital art world?
I would say, so first of all, I think in the conventional art world today, in the market-driven art world today, there is still the need to have the star artist, because that's how the various art institutions and art dealers will make their money. The digital artist today perhaps scuppers that to some extent, because, for example, if I just talk about us, our work is open, our work is not for sale, our work involves collaboration, and in some cases it's members of the public that are collaborating on the spot and contributing artwork to it. I had a conversation with a gallerist the other day who wanted to know how all of this could possibly work, and I said, well, actually in many ways it's like going to the filmmaking model, where the money is up front and the work follows. It's not about selling. I think possibly I would say that, in my humble understanding, that early computer artists probably did feel like lone wolves, were working on their own, desperately trying to be understood, not understood, seeking support maybe from a few other individual artists. Certainly Genetic Moo over the years have had times where we've had difficulty explaining to people what we're doing, but it's always been, because so much of it has been about collaboration and being part of a growing generation of people who are tinkering with technology. The internet came out and people could connect with each other more easily. I would say we're different, and it's less about us, the artists, and more about the work, what happens, it's an overturning of the traditional, art model. It's not about the sellable object anymore.
I mean, the one problem with that is, of course, if you don't have a sellable object, how does the money flow through the system?
Yeah.
Of course, even artists have to eat, I understand. So
Absolutely.
some of them several times a day.
Well, I would, and please jump in on this as well, Tim, but for me, I mean, from very early days of art making, let's not forget I was a filmmaker at college, that I thought if I could work independently of selling art, if I could avoid that model at all the better for me, because then I wouldn't be compromising what I did. And when I say that, I'm not saying all artists compromise what they do when they sell art, but it's just I didn't want to have to worry about what I could make that would sell, and that would be it would be possible to experiment, try things out, take risks, have a go, whatever.
But doesn't, if you're paid in advance, if you're on some sort of if you have some sort of funding from an institution or something like that, doesn't that come with strings as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, initially we used to pay to put shows on. We'd hire a space or whatever with some other artists, split the costs, and put the show on. 5 people walk through the door, or whatever. Then bit by bit, you pay less, or then and these days we get paid. So we go. Organisations either approach us, or we work with people on a series of shows, or come back to us later on, and then we agree a price for doing a certain thing. So only certain types of organisations so far have approached us with these sorts of money, and certainly they're not the traditional art galleries who don't seem to be don't necessarily have the skill set to deal with putting on shows with projectors and computers and so forth, or the type of space, or maybe the type of audience, or the understanding, or certainly we don't sell any of this stuff. It's digital code. We give lots of it away when we do workshops and things like that. So it's not. So yeah, it doesn't quite gel with some spaces, but other spaces are prepared to pay us money to come into a space to engage with the public. Often running workshops concurrently with a show, and often getting stuff that we're interested in, which is engaging people to create digital art, and then put that on the walls as part of the show as well. So taking interaction in another level. So because those offers started to appear, we've moved in that direction, or we've moved in that direction because we could see that places would commission us to do this type of thing. So absolutely, our practice has become much more participatory. We've desexualized. Some of the earlier pieces were much more lots of naked body parts flying around, stuff like that, because we're working often with a more kind of family, especially with workshops, kids audience. So we've taken out some elements. So yeah, there have been some compromises, and we do put them back in and do adult ones and stuff like that as well. But it's not. We
were nominated for an erotic award.
But that's kind of part of the fascination of this project, is that it's flexible. Digital art is inherently flexible. Its coding can be put in it. Once you've done it, you can stick it anywhere you want, any size you want.
But I think importantly though, Tim, is that we have this combination of, yes, we do commissions, but we also organise our own shows as well. And in the micro world, we're curating. We're actually selecting artists or inviting artists to be a part of it, or members of the public.
How does that happen? I mean, somebody asks you to put a show together.
Well, it could be, so for example, I mentioned Arcade Cardiff earlier. So we went to them, said we want to put on a show. They actually gave us the gallery space for 3 weeks. They saw it as a project space. We went in there, set up our micro world, and we'd invited artists to participate. We had next to no money to give any of these artists, but the artists we invited, which included Paul Grandjean and Team Beck and Jokel Lees, were interested in what we were trying to do and wanted to be a part of it. And the gallery was excited because it was a gallery in a shopping centre.
So this is an event where, in effect, no money changed hands?
No, we paid. We gave everyone travel money. People had to come do the talks, and we paid the artists a little bit of 50 quid or something. Tiny amount, relatively. But we were collecting the work for them. We were taking it there, installing it, running it for them, and there was talks and so forth like that. So that was
an artist running an artist project.
We always try to pay people who in the shows that we curate And often other times we might get given a reasonably large commission to do something, and then as part of that we might say, right, well, we want to do a live performance show for a week to test some of these ideas that are being made for this larger funded one, and then that way we can kind of spread it into a more open shows where we can get other people involved, I suppose.
Just going back to the exhibition that you mentioned in Cardiff, was this something for which you actually had to pay out of your own pockets, or was it funded in some way?
Well, yes and no, in as far as that Arcade Cardiff actually decided they wanted to give us a fee for being in the space. It was a nominal fee, say £450, £500 to cover expenses, etc. And we used that money then to cover some of those costs, but that included giving the artists who participated money as well for participating in it. And all of the artists involved had understood that it could be that, you know, it was an experiment to try, you know, partake in. But Tim said, you know, was very clear about the fact, and I agreed with it, that, you know, if anyone is participating in our event and we can give them some money, all the better. And I would love to have the model in future, which would probably have to be a commission basis, that if we have workshops where people are creating creatures, objects, whatever, for the exhibition, that we in fact should be paying them as well. They shouldn't be paying to do the workshop. All of our workshops are free to participate in.
We do enough commission projects each year that in the last 2 years we've made a living from it. It's a very small Margate living, and as part of that living is any money that we met in excess of what we need to eat and so forth, pay rent, gets put back into the project, either by buying more projectors or by putting on events which give opportunities to other digital artists to take part and for us to explore collaboration in further ways. So,
and you fund the Sharman Prize?
That's right. So my parents died over a couple of years ago, and within 16 months of each other. And both of them were painters, artists, and also incredibly supportive of what Tim and I were doing, and excited by the arts. And I wanted to do something in their memory. And Tim and I had often talked about the fact that, you know, in our future, in our still developing micro world, we would personally be commissioning contributions, but without too much criteria, let's say, for what people make, giving them a free rein to try things out. Anyway, so we had the opportunity of providing a prize for the London group, this group that we've been members of since 2009, I think. They have a London group open, which invites people to submit to show work side by side with the London group, and so we created a new digital art prize for it, and we're delighted because several artists of merit put in. We were particularly taken by the artist Sandra Crisp's 3D video animation, and so she was our first recipient of the prize, to do with the money to do with what she wanted.
Do you think there's a kind of anti-capitalist is too political a word, but there's a tendency amongst digital artists to think of art in an entirely different model, partly because of the background of the free digital software that we're all using. People don't want to make money from it, in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we have never been very, overly political about it, but undoubtedly it is political, and I suppose, we've worked with and shown with Furtherfield, who have a very strong position about this. And also when we were with Area 10, there was always lots of, talking about open source, in the early days, and doing it with others and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of the new Bitcoin is sort of, and there's quite a lot of actually now online digital art selling things. Lumen does one itself actually, but we've not really been that interested in those. But they're trying to. Bitcoin as well is trying to authenticate each digital thing as an original piece of digital art made by someone, so therefore you can sell it, sort of thing. Well, that's one use of Bitcoin, anyway. So
that's
we're not really interested in those. No.
So there are plenty of digital artists like us who feel liberated from that traditional model. But the people that are catching up with the digital world are thinking, how can we make money from it? And a big question in the collection of digital art: how do we preserve it?
Yes.
And I have actually being relatively vocal and
Was
saying,
that not on this
"We don't
list of
care."
questions? It wasn't, was it?
Sorry.
That's that's the most
It's
common
a
question.
very-
No, good. I'm glad it wasn't.
It's an over-talked subject.
I never
so we
answer
will
that
not,
one.
We will
Not
not
my
contribute
business.
too much to it. But Tim and I invariably say we don't care, because that's not why we're making it, so that someone can hold on to it. And obviously, I mean,
Exactly.
so I studied film years ago, and a lot of it was, there's a lot of performance art around, and it all just simply had to be documented, and so be it, document it, you know.
Well, I mean, some sorts of art really only exist for the documentation. It's incidentally they happen and they're over.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm thinking of
Performance art.
Yes.
or
Stuart Brisley's work, for example.
things like a packet for Julian Assange, you know, that Media Group Bitnik thing. Once it's over, only the documentation.
And you know what, sometimes, so I did do performance art when I was on Foundation, and sometimes actually it was simply for that photograph, because the performance itself may have been a little bit dull.
Have you had much to do with the Computer Arts Society in the course of your career?
Yeah, I guess, yes, we've been to various Computer Arts Society events, and we've put on...
When did you first sign up with Computer Arts Society?
What, the mailing list?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, a decade ago probably, maybe more. I suppose the most important, we've had lots of interaction with the Computer Arts Society over the years, but the most important one was that we introduced Nick Lambert to Carla at Lumen, both of whom we knew independently, and it looked to me as if they had a Welsh link in common, but apart from that, it looked as if they might be able to help each other as organisations, both of which were quite small and were looking to get more connections, and so I guess that was the most important one.
It's fascinating how the role of the CAS has changed, you know, over the last 50 years. And indeed, one of the questions that I have been asking people is, what do you think the CAS can most usefully do in the next 50 years?
Well, Tim's got some opinions, so you can go through it. But I mean, with CAS specifically, we have given a CAS talk. We gave one in Leicester, and that was quite interesting because Sean actually decided it could be interesting to actually introduce what is interactive art to a community of people in Leicester who, you know, don't usually go to Computer Arts Society talks. And we also then, as part of a Micro World and also a Blister Cinema event, we had CAS talks, so where various people got together talking about their work or aspects of, you know, what is digital art, for example.
I mean, the CAS seems to offer quite a lot of sort of glue in the fabric, doesn't it? It's the mailing list for one thing, which is a very useful list of what's on, and then the talks, and then it is just does seem to be very largely putting people in touch with each other, that sort of thing. We
were doing an online meeting the other day, and it was
CAGM.
Yeah, and the connect, you know, recognising everyone that's a part
half
of
the
it.
room, yeah. As the camera panned round,
more than half.
But yeah,
because it is the digital community is obviously massive by comparison of what it was, but nevertheless it's still in the art world standards a small community.
But yeah, CAS is very small, has very little funding, and it seems to me it should be much. It should have a much better mission or place in the world than it does have, I think, anyway. And I'm sort of toying with the idea of whether I should actually get a bit more actively engaged with CAS. I really like Nick and Sean, who and Paul I know a bit as well. I think they're great, and I think they just, I think they need a bit of some. It needs to be more than it is.
Well, it needs
They've only just built a website, for example. I mean, it's it's kind of a bit odd. It's an odd one to me.
Well, it's possibly because typically with any organisations, everyone's doing so many other things.
Yes, exactly.
The thing has been there, you know it's there,
Yeah.
but actually now, especially because it's this 50th year, it now needs to mobilise, and it could have a greater relevance.
You talked about the audience, the community of digital art having grown.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you think that bodes for the future? Do you think digital art is going to become more and more mainstream, or what sort of trends would you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it may be for some people, some gallery organisations, it may be that they are trying to be as resistant as long as they can be, but it's just like because the younger generation of audience expects to be involved in its art experience, that they have to move on, and I think so CAS could have a role in that, in terms of actually possibly they're, so just like this guy from a more traditional gallery that I was speaking to the other day, these people actually, some of them do want to know more, and they need to have a place to go to understand more, and you know how that could be. I mean, you suggested that they could actually have what was it, a website actually detailing interactive art, was it? Or?
There isn't a good, these are just loads of, just bits of ideas, but there's not a decent computer art website anywhere on the internet, for example. So, but the CAS hasn't got any money, so should CAS take sort of fees or whatever from its members? You know, I don't know how many there are, a few, couple of thousand on that mailing list or something, or maybe many more, I don't know, but you know, it's all very sort of dispersed out there, sort of thing. And it's a good contact list, I suppose, for exhibitions and so forth. Which we've used promoting, for example, that show we talked about to get people to put into it.
But your point about delivering digital art over the web is a very interesting one. I mean, it's easier said than done, I suspect, in many cases, particularly in artworks like yours.
Yeah.
But it seems to me CAS has already got two, various books out, and they've had it kind of in the last 10 years or so, especially with Nick's great academic sort of oriented, that they've done a really good job in sort of getting all of this stuff, as much information as possible, and I guess this is part of that as well, getting all this information recorded down, but then it needs to be put together onto I would suggest a website rather than a book that costs.
There's I can't remember what
an
it
academic
stands for.
book.
You remember there's a French website, DCAM, I think it is, which is like an encyclopedia of digital
It's rubbish. It's rubbish.
Well, it's not. It's
just a
rubbish.
list. It's just a random list of things with no kind of.
No, but it's an individual who has put it together. So it's just there's people who are.
I shouldn't say it's rubbish. Actually, we're on it. It's good, but it serves. It's just an encyclopedia put together by some probably very old person who was part of the computer art scene in the 70s, I would guess, and has just kept the list going. It's a bit like CAS in a way. It's like it needs a better sense of purpose, CAS, and I don't know if that should be to do with the fact that the hundreds of students are coming out of all these art colleges making videos and mobile phone this and that, whatevers, and then there isn't really a sort of space where these people can connect. Do they need it? Don't know. But I think it's good that artists talk to each other about the problems they have and sort of solutions, but there are other organisations that do that, like Dorkbot and your Hackspaces and so forth. So
Stanza had a thing called Sound Toys on his website for some time, where you could put up your own artworks. I put up one of mine at one stage.
yes.
And there is that sort of thing, but it's very much hit and miss, isn't it?
Yeah.
Some areas are covered by some people.
Yeah,
that's it. There's nothing systematic.
It's true, but I would imagine that because CAS in the end does have an incredible array of people on its mailing list who see themselves as part of it, that with perhaps a more clear vision of what they could go forward with, that there would be tremendous I don't know whether it would be skill set, but experience or range of artists involved. But I don't think you were particularly talking about representing art online, were you? Were you
of course.
Second Life gallery?
All sorts, anything. I don't know, you just need to get all this stuff together. But I don't know if you do particularly. I mean, the stuff's there, it's all over the place. You just have to sort of dig it out and you can find interesting information about anything. And many of these CAS artists, but I don't know. Without money, it's very hard to kind of just make a grand plan of what CAS should do, and it doesn't have really any money. So,
but it certainly looks as though the next 50 years will be quite exciting.
Or it might just be absorbed into the mainstream, so become completely not.
Well, it depends. It depends on with people like Vanguard,
unnecessary.
Because we are part of a group, as I say, that is over 100 years old. If it weren't for the fact that members are actively trying to do something that's interesting, then everyone would have the right to say, well, okay, it was interesting once because it had people like Bomberg in it, but now it has no relevance. So you have to continually find what your relevance is, and make it meaningful to today. But I think perhaps what's quite interesting is who are the young generation of digital artists now? Where are they? Because perhaps they're not actually in the art colleges, because a lot of the art colleges are still traditional.
No, they are in art colleges.
I'm just thinking about the Sunday Painter. We had a studio with artists who were 20 years younger than us, and they were conceptual artists, working in painting or sculpture or, little installations or whatever, but nobody was doing anything digital.
It might not be programming, but it will be using digital technologies and so forth to
but
create.
I'm just thinking, if a lot of it, so we have
art.
in Kent a lot of digital media courses, so it could be that the new sort of creative content for galleries and that will actually not be coming so much from the art colleges as students who have studied digital media in more varied settings.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.